Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our webinar. My name is Ploy Sitimai, and I'm an Innovation and Change Officer at the Center for Aging Better. I've been at Aging Better for about 2.5 years now, and have been managing a number of different projects across employment and housing, including this most recent project on inclusive products. Before we get started, a few housekeeping notes for you. All attendees will be muted throughout. We have had a few advanced questions and know that you'll have more as we go along. If you have any questions, we invite you to send these through the Q&A button and not the chat. Only the questions from the Q&A box will be picked up for discussion with the panelists and researchers. You should be able to see this button in the ribbon at the bottom of your screen, but please do use the chat to introduce yourselves or share any links you think may be useful to other attendees. We know there may be lots of questions and we may not have time to respond to all of them, but we'll try our best to do so, and any that we don't pick up, we'll try and respond to them after the event, potentially through blogs or other online engagement. Today's webinar will also be recorded and made available to watch on our YouTube channel after the event, and there'll be subtitles in the on-demand video if you should need them. And if you're watching this on demand and would like to join the conversation online, please use #missingthemarket. Before we begin, I also want to introduce you to our panel and our research team who are here today. On our research team, we have Christine Hemphill, Managing Director of Open Inclusion, Tom Pakinko, Research Director of Open Inclusion, and Paul Flatters, Chief Executive of Trajectory Partnership. They will shortly be presenting on the key findings from our research. And on our panel, we have Astrid Hennessy, a participant from our research who has made changes to her home to retain her safety and comfort. Ed Warner, founder and CEO of MotionSpot and government champion for design of accessible products and spaces, and Jacoa Reynolds, a housing occupational therapist with the Wandsworth Regeneration Team and accessible and inclusive environment specialist. We'll be hearing from our panel later on for a conversation around the findings of the report and what more we can do to better meet the needs of older adults through inclusive design. Earlier this week, we launched our new report, The Missing Market: How Can Home Retailers Better Meet the Needs of over 50s Consumers? This report summarizes research that we commissioned Open Inclusion and Trajectory Partnership to conduct with individuals aged 50 and over to explore the market for inclusive products in the home. The research particularly focused on products, fixtures, and fittings in the kitchen and bathroom, and sought to understand what demand there is for consumers for inclusive products, how well the market is currently serving the needs of those over 50, and what the key levers for change are to get more inclusive products in the homes. It's worth clarifying here that when we say inclusive products are designed, what I'm referring to are products that are designed to be accessible and usable by as many people as reasonably possible without the need for special adaptation. So products such as lever taps, high-level ovens, and walk-in showers rather than grab rails and stair lifts. This is an area that we in Aging Better are really interested in, as we know from previous research the potential impact products can have on people's quality of life and ability to maintain independence in the home. Excuse me. Products such as grab rails, stair lifts, and mobility aids can be crucial to maintaining independence in the home, but these purchases are usually a triggered need installed as a last resort in response to an accident or crisis. Our research has shown the potential for much more subtle, everyday, inclusively designed products in the home to support people to be independent for longer before the need for or alongside specially adapted products. But often these products are overlooked by not only consumers and retailers, but those responsible for the design of homes and the fixtures and fittings within them. This webinar explores how we can better meet the needs of individuals over 50 who are not only a growing market, but also an incredibly diverse one through inclusive design. This topic is even more important given the ongoing impact of the COVID-19 pandemic and the fact that many of us have been spending more time than ever before at home, often without the same network of support we previously had. In terms of the format for this webinar, I'll shortly be passing over to Paul from Trajectory Research and Christine and Tom from Open Inclusion to present our key findings. I'll then be speaking to each of our panel members individually to hear more about their experiences in this space and what more we in this room can do, retailers, housing associations, interior designers, architects, charities, to really make sure we're meeting the needs of our diverse population and not creating barriers to access. I'll then open up the floor to the audience for the last 10 to 15 minutes for any questions to our panel or researchers. So that's enough from me. Over to you, Paul, Christine, and Tom to present on the key findings from our research, and if you'd like to turn on your cameras. And just a reminder to the audience, please do feel free to post questions in the Q&A throughout the session.
Great, thanks, Ploy. Let me just share my screen. Welcome all, thank you for coming. Okay, so broadly speaking, we're going to be sharing back some of the key findings from our research that informed this report. The order of our presentation will be starting with an intro and methodology, and then talking about the key consumer insights, and finally closing out with some recommendations. Paul, over to you.
Thanks, Tom. Do you want to move on to the next slide? Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Great to be with you this morning. just to it's like any good, I hope good research presentation. We're going to start with defining our terms, and actually Ploy's already done this for us. So we were exploring inclusive design in this research, and particularly in relation to kitchens and bathrooms, as you know. But just in terms of what we mean by inclusive design, it's the design of mainstream products and or services that are accessible to and usable by as many people as reasonably possible without the need for special adaptation or specialized design. So we've got a couple of examples of, here. The one on the left is the Breville Hot Cup, which helps people to pour hot water easily, and that's a mainstream product. It's available in Argos, Currys, that sort of place, marketed as a product for everyone, as opposed to the universal kettle tipper there that you see on the right, which is much more of a specialist product and only available through specialist retailers. So we're thinking more on the left as you're looking than on the right in terms of universal design. Can I have the next slide, please, Tom? I personally was delighted to be involved in this research, which I believe is incredibly important. As well as an insight specialist, I also do a lot of work on consumer trends and forecasting, and this is a subject very, very close to my heart. How well or otherwise the needs of the over 50s are being met, and as Tom will go on and Christine will go on to explain, that there are lots of unmet needs for consumers out there, which is a consumer detriment, but also there's a missed opportunity for retailers and manufacturers in this regard, and that is only going to get bigger if things don't change. As we all know, the over 50s are a growing proportion of the population. As we say in the report, they already account for more than 50% of consumer spending, and as they grow as a proportion of the population, that figure is only going to increase. Of course, they're a very diverse segment of the population, including some of the most affluent, but also some of the most poor consumers in the UK. This group of people also is changing as each generation passes through. Their expectations of life and of consumers are getting higher. There was a time when I first started doing this kind of work when this group would be composed of what we call the silent generation. They were called the silent generation as for a reason. They tended not to complain about things. Well, that group is being replaced by the baby boomers and Generation X steaming into this group, and they are not a silent generation. They expect more out of life. They expect more from the businesses that they deal with. They expect to be active, involved. Just for example, the proportion of over 65s who are in work has doubled in the last 10 or 15 years or so, as an example of how this group is changing and how that their expectations are on the rise, and the need to meet the expectation that their needs are met is only going to increase. So that's why we think this research is important. And Tom, if you could move on to my final slide. So this is what we did. It was a 5-stage research program involving consumers. The youngest was age 50, the oldest age 84. We began with a literature review, just to understand some of the basics of the market in terms of what's available already, and explored any existing evidence that applied to our research objectives, just to make sure that we were building on the state of existing knowledge rather than replicating it. In terms of our sort of primary research, our new research, we started with a survey of 100 people online to find out their attitudes towards aging itself, how they felt about it, and issues relating to their homes in terms of the extent to which they had or planned to make any adaptations to their kitchens and bathrooms. There was a separate quantitative research exercise commissioned by Aging Better with Ipsos Mori, which tested some of the hypotheses that emerged from our research. That was done later and separately with a nationally representative sample of over 50s, just shy of 1,000 people there. Our detailed research began with home visits. We visited 9 homes, a mixture of couples and people interviewed individually, and we observed how people were using their bathrooms and their kitchens. We gave them various tasks to perform, taught them how they felt about their kitchens, and observed things like the challenges they had in performing tasks, barriers, and the often very creative hacks they designed to get around some of these challenges. We then went on to do some accompanied shopping, both in physical retail and online, with 9 participants, just to understand how people navigated the retail experience and what worked for them and what didn't work for them in terms of the retail experience. And then finally, we conducted focus groups, 3 focus groups that included 19 participants, and we examined some of the practical things that retailers might do to help better serve over 50s customers, and that was composed of a mix of people who'd participated early on. So some of the people who'd done that, who'd visited at home and accompanied on their shopping trips, we invited some of them back for the focus groups. There were also some new people in the focus groups as well. And just finally, from me, the research participants included a spread of incomes, different living situations, and access needs. Thanks. Over to you, Tom.
Great, thanks, Paul. So it falls to me to summarize what is essentially a pretty large report, quite in depth, in about 5 minutes. So do bear with me. We're going to try to cover some of the key consumer insights that came out of our research, which Paul just summarized the different stages of. And just one thing to mention about these insights is, as you can see, there were some fairly smaller qualitative, aspects which allowed us to gain really rich insights from a smaller group of over 50s. So we don't expect our research to be fully definitive or representative, but it does suggest important trends we feel that need to be explored further and should indeed be explored further. So many over 50s are making changes to their homes. This may seem like an obvious statement, but it needs to be said. Change is happening, change is being made. Over half of our survey respondents made significant physical, structural, and layout changes to their kitchen and bathroom. That was the focus of this research, in fact, was the kitchens and bathroom space in the past 5 years. Of those who had not yet made changes, more than 60% expected to carry out improvements in these areas of their home. And then significantly, a number of these changes were specifically designed to improve safety and independence in the home. So for example, brighter lighting, easier to use taps, and lighter or easier to use cookware. And you can see here some of the top 5 physical or structural or layout changes to the kitchens and bathrooms from our respondents. Over 50s consumers want attractive products that are easy to use. Attractive and easy to use. Those are the 2 key features. Over 3/4, so about 76%, I believe, of our survey respondents who made physical, structural, or layout changes to their kitchen had done so to make it easier for them to use. So examples of inclusive features that our participants expected in both kitchen and bathroom products, for example, are easy to maintain. So how easy is the product to clean? How easy is it to change batteries on? Is it designed for longevity? Easy to move. If you get a large appliance into your home, how easy is that to carry, move? But it also applies to smaller appliances like kettles. Are they easy to lift, for example, durable when dropped? Easy controls. This can be easy to turn knobs, buttons, verbal feedback and controls were discussed in our research as well. Easy to access. So are the labels, the wording, the text, is it easy to read? Are the displays clear enough, etc.? And easy to understand, finally. So simple instructions, better descriptions of products, etc. Having said this, in parallel to this, our research has found that despite change being made and so on, there was still a significant number of our research participants over 50 who do not recognize current or future needs. And this came out for various reasons. Some reasons include they don't want to think about getting older. Perhaps they don't know what inclusive options are out there. In fact, there was some confusion about the term inclusive. What does it mean? Is it designed for disability or is it designed for all? Worrying about cost, or feeling overly optimistic about aging, a kind of optimism bias. And you can see that in the quotation quotes here that we've pulled out. So I'm going to roll with the punches. You don't know what will be thrown at you in 20 years. That's a blind man with dyslexia in his early 60s. A woman in her 70s told us, my mom got in and out of the bath for years and didn't have any help. So I'm expecting to have that same level of ability and so on. Often over 50s recognize needs only when forced to by situations, by something essentially going wrong. And this highlights a really key knowledge gap. And as we'll talk about in more detail throughout this research presentation, our research does suggest that retailers, manufacturers, product designers, and also a number of other key influencers have a part to play in supporting customers along the journey. Now, coming on the heels of not always recognizing needs was this tendency that we noticed in the home visits in particular to make do with hack solutions, what we're calling hack solutions. So these are obviously kind of do-it-yourself solutions, some of which were actually quite dangerous. You can see a lady there pulling out a tub from her top shelf using a rather large knife. The other photo there shows a rubber band placed around a jar in someone's shelf, just to because they can't read the label, so they identify it by the rubber band and they know what that is. So cost or convenience factored into why people used hack solutions was also due to a lack of awareness of inclusive products that are out there. And also, many research participants told us that they think of inclusive products as ugly or medicalized. And I'm sure we'll discuss that in more detail a little later on today. But whereas, in fact, there were nicer, more useful, more mainstream products available, but people simply didn't know about it. Over 50s consumers do want better advice from retailers about products. So this kind of dovetails from what I was just talking about. In the Ipsos Mori poll commissioned on behalf of Aging Better of 912 people over 50, 59% felt they would benefit from retailers giving them advice about products that might suit their changing needs. Interestingly, 71% would trust specialist retailers much more than mainstream ones. And so there, only 49% actually would trust mainstream retailers to provide this advice. So this is interesting. It's good for the specialist retailers, but it really does present an opportunity, a gap and an opportunity here for mainstream retailers to develop product ranges, position themselves as trusted sellers, etc. The other things just to mention is that a lot of these realizations of current or future needs often happen at key transitional moments. That could be, for example, adult children helping their aging parents renovate or make changes to their home, for example. Nearly through the key findings here, and then I'll pass it over to Christine for our recommendations. We did hear time and again from our research participants that age-targeted products could be off-putting. There were concerns about price, for one thing, concerns about aesthetics as well, and the kind of stigma surrounding medicalized, specialized products designed specifically with disabilities or older age in mind, such as grab rails and shower seats. And, as you can see in the photo there, just that kind of medicalized equipment. And people really didn't want that in their home. There is a place for such products, of course, but there was that kind of generalized stigma around these medicalized / ugly products. So again, our research reinforced the market potential of aspirational and age-inclusive marketing. Most participants over 50 didn't want to be treated separately or differently from younger customers, and they preferred terms like "for all" or "for families" on products rather than age-specific kind of marketing. The other thing is inclusive products need to be easier to find. So I spoke about this earlier. There's a general lack of awareness and knowledge around what products are out there. And this applies both in store and online. In store, other factors compound the general lack of knowledge around inclusive products. These factors include narrow aisles, lack of seating spaces, so people need to sit down, take rest, take breaks as they explore the store. And we found in our mystery shopping accompanied shops that people were leaning on various improvised surfaces, some of which weren't that steady, just to kind of give themselves some breathing room and give themselves a bit of a break. Insufficient signage contributes to the lack of finding inclusive products as well. Small print on labels making it hard, or unclear labeling, and the inability to open or try products in store. Many of the same issues appear online. In addition to that, online, for example, the inability to zoom in on products, to really accurately visualize products in the home, or to filter by ease of use features and terms like for everyone, which I mentioned earlier. There is I should say, a lack of common terminology as well contributed to the problem, as I mentioned earlier. So differing opinions on what inclusive design means. My final slide. So really the takeaway here is really for retailers, designers, and others at each stage to think about the overall journey of awareness and acceptance through to understanding and access that we've identified through our research. And the 4 steps of this journey, customer journey and model for change, include need. So recognizing needs. How can I recognize needs earlier? Acceptance, how can I accept that I have these needs? And many needs are in fact invisible, so they may not be known even to people themselves. Then transforming that awareness and acceptance into knowledge, learning about solutions, where and how to find them easily, and then finally capacity. So finding solutions that meet budget considerations, the realities of the physical space of people's homes, mental and physical energy levels, etc. There's a role to play, as we say, for retailers as well as others in this journey. And with that, I will turn it over to Christine to talk about our recommendations and build out a little bit more on this model for change. Christine.
Thank you, Tom. If you can go to the next slide. So, I mean, some fabulous insights here, and I really would recommend that you go into the report and have a read of this in detail if this is a space that you're interested in, because essentially use this to inform your decisions, because there's just a very large opportunity here to improve value. So whether you're a retailer, a manufacturer, or someone involved in the process of supporting people through that essentially change model Tom just mentioned, from awareness of a need through to the capacity to implement that need, there are just some fabulous opportunities here. Here's the key ones we've pulled out here in recommendations. And the first is design and manufacture of the products themselves, and actually also of the services to support them. So ease of use without compromising the aesthetics or affordability is the most important thing we heard time and time again throughout every phase of the research. Essentially, experience is a combination of both functional value and emotional value, and it felt to consumers that they were choosing one versus another, as opposed to being able to say that they would like both emotional delight in a product as well as the functional capability and flexibility of it. So for organisations that wish to push the bar of both of those, so if you have functionally capable products, to make them more delightful, or products that are more aesthetically appealing and delightful to make them more functional, there are many ways that you could move that capability across from one side to the other. Considering the whole customer journey, so rather than just the product in place and in use, but considering that from browsing in store, finding it, getting it home, setting it up, using it, and then maintaining it through its life. And also things like installation and returns. We heard a lot of people talking about looking specifically at how products, how that was sold with that in mind. Testing with users, so need for ongoing insight from the over 50s consumers. This is probably the how-to piece of this, as opposed to the recommendation, is engage users that are over 55 throughout the process, from understanding this very large unmet need, where hacks are being used, where those gaps are today, through to testing ideas for improving and addressing them. And also just recognising the power of some really small changes, and little things like changing the shape of a handle, or changing the size of a button, or the colour contrast of something of a key affordance on a product. These are things that can make a really large difference, not just for older consumers, but actually for many consumers that might just have a temporary situational or actually a permanent access need at a younger age. So it just makes it more delightful actually in experience for many people. Next slide, please, Tom. The second thing is, once you've got a product that is more delightful in its experience end to end, is making sure that consumers can find it and can understand the delight that you've designed into it. And Tom's already spoken a bit about the messaging, and that idea that messaging that is age specific is really not that well desired by this community. They would prefer language like universal, simplicity, making life easier, user-friendly, or easy. And easy quite specifically, because people will look for ease in different ways. So easy to understand, easy to maintain, easy to hold, lightweight. So different factors and facets of ease that might be specific to that particular person that would make it a much more enjoyable product for them. And really that appealing language and terminology. So, making it delightful, thinking you're working with your marketing team as you would in any other feature and function, and really thinking of delightful language and testing that with the community. And independent product reviewers should also really include that inclusivity and ease of use. So thinking when you're getting independent product reviewers, when they're getting them in, really thinking about how does this product work across a range of different consumers, and making sure that feeds in. Tom. Thank you. And in terms of selling this and actually how the retail experience itself can be more enjoyable, but also easier to find the products and services that people are looking for, the research really bore out that whole customer journey end to end, and that this journey can happen over quite a long period of time for some, and in others it might have been triggered by a particular thing and could happen quite quickly. But those different journeys people take and supporting them across that. So browsing products in-store and online, this is a very omni-channel community. So we really did find through the research, people are using many formats to find products and then go and have a look at them either online or in store to see and think how they might work in their home, to ask for advice from friends, from family, from tradespeople, and actually from professionals as well, other professionals. Thinking about affordability. This is actually another way that you can functionally delight people, is think about products that today might be very seen as quite specialised and be quite expensive, and thinking about how you could create something that is more affordable and more mainstream, that more people can reach to that capability just as and when they need it. Empowering staff. This was a really interesting one. When people went into store, and actually this is just as true of contact centres or anywhere else where you're engaging directly with staff, helping them help the consumer identify what features and what capability a product may have that might suit them. So making sure that they're informed with the capability you've designed into your products in that end-to-end experience. Considering ways to bridge the gap between online and in-store experience. Sometimes these feel like quite different experiences and can almost feel like starting that learning again, as opposed to a really kind of cohesive brand experience that is omni-channel across each of your ways that people can engage with your brand. And the competence and confidence for retail staff on the floor, really to support people and to have that conversation with them. So not just talking about the features, but talking about the customer and having the confidence to say, how is it that this might support you? Do you have any additional needs in your home that we can look for here today? Next slide, please, Tom. And really the last slide for me, and then the last bit, is helping people help the consumer. So sometimes consumers reach to to different channels to get to that information. That may be architects, tradespeople and interior designers, and also people involved in planning and building and managing homes that might be doing that more broadly. So making sure that you're supporting the professionals that are then supporting the end consumer. So again, that journey when it's got an intermediated piece in it, supporting those people know what's been designed in. So in summary, essentially, this is a missing market, and it is a very large and attractive missing market. The opportunity is there to address it and really gain a foothold in what is a group of people with significant unmet needs that are really looking for this and looking to change their homes to maintain their independence and delight. Back to you.
Thank you so much for that presentation, Christine, Tom, and Paul. It's been a really insightful project, and there are a lot of themes and recommendations that you've pulled out there that I'd really like to take forward into conversation with our panelists. So in terms of the format for this part of the webinar, I prepared a few questions for each of our panel members, which I'll ask one by one, and then I'll open up the floor to audience members to ask questions to either our panel of experts or research team. So while I'm speaking, do please continue to add questions to the Q&A box. So panel, I'd please like to invite you to turn your cameras on. And I'd actually like to start this conversation by first speaking to you, Astrid. As one of the people who took part in the research, I'd be really interested to hear what your reflections are on the project now you've heard their findings back. Is there anything that particularly surprises you or has stuck with you from your time taking part in the research? Astrid, you're just on mute.
Right,
Lovely.
can you hear me now? Yes, I was surprised and relieved in a way, surprised that other people, so many other people had had problems sourcing things, and relieved that it wasn't just me.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And what do inclusive and easy to use products mean to you? And has this perspective changed at all over the past year through taking part in the research or through COVID-19?
Well, what the terms mean to me is that things are readily available and accessible and suitable for my age and needs, but also mainstream. I don't have to go to specialist places, you know, I can find them easily. What changed after COVID really was that I had to do everything online because I couldn't go into stores, and it was hopeless trying to telephone. So I did learn to use the computer rather better, but I found it quite hard finding things, you know, like, not particularly to do with bathrooms and kitchens, but, you know, just things I needed around the house, because there was so much available, and, you know, there weren't always easy ways for me to find them online.
Yeah, that's a great point. That's something that came out in our research as well.
Yeah.
And we've heard a lot about kind of the importance of easy to use and accessible products in the home. I know you've recently moved home and have been making changes to it. Can you tell us a bit more about the changes you've been making and why?
Right, well, I moved from a house on top of a very steep hill, which didn't seem very practical as I was getting older. And also it was getting, particularly the garden, too big for me. I ended up buying an end of terrace Victorian house. And the first time I saw it, I said to my daughter, this is not an old person's house. I love it, but I can't live here. And she said, well, yes, you can make changes. So I called in the family firm that I use for building and repairs and said, you know, is it feasible, kitchen and bathroom especially? And they came up with lots of ideas. For example, very old-fashioned small bathroom. They said, well, if you don't mind us knocking through to the bedroom, we can give you a walk-in shower. We can change all the taps. We can put a downstairs toilet in. There was a conservatory area outside the kitchen, which was big enough to have a new boiler with accessible controls. The old one didn't. It was high up on the wall on the landing. And also to have a downstairs toilet, which I really felt was important. And then I realised that the rather gloomy and dark and very old-fashioned kitchen diner could become just a kitchen, and the dining table and everything could move into the conservatory area, which was much, much nicer. And so with the kitchen, I really had to get everything all built in. So I spent a lot of time looking around storerooms, and it was very tiring. That was the worst. And now and again, I thought to myself, why didn't I just buy a retirement flat? Because, well, as Tom was, people are saying in the research, in big stores, the signage wasn't clear enough. You'd get to the right floor for things, but then I would wander around in a sort of daze, and there often weren't assistants to ask. In example, particularly kitchenware stores, there was loads and loads of stuff, but the labeling didn't help me at all, because it was either too small, too high, or too low. So I got used to taking a magnifying glass with me so that I could try and read them on tiptoe or down on my hands and knees. The other infuriating thing was that I would, particularly in the kitchen, arrange, get everything together in my head, in my notes, go to order it, and then I'd find that some things were temporarily out of stock and nobody knew when they would be in again. Other things would be available in 3 to 6 weeks, other things not till 12 to 16 weeks or something like that. And, I couldn't keep my builders and plumbers and decorators hanging around forever. So often I had to compromise. But the things I went for in the kitchen were things that were eye-level cooker, eye-level microwave, cupboards that weren't too high so that I could reach everything and get things in and out, and taps that were levers rather than screws. Yeah, that's about it, really. So it took a long time. It got there more or less in the end, but it was quite wearing.
I think it's really great to hear kind of how much you think about these things and how much of a positive planner you are, whereas we know in some of our research that doesn't necessarily reflect how everyone thinks about these things. But even though you are thinking about these things, you still find it seems to me that you're still finding it a bit difficult to find some of these products. Is there anything that you found kind of a retailer or interior designer or one of your builders has done particularly helpful for you to help you make these decisions?
Well, it was the builders were the most helpful, to be honest, because they measured everything and more or less told me and suggested places I could go and look. And because they, at the time, as I said, I didn't use the computer much for online shopping, but they did. And so they could point me in the right direction. I didn't actually find in-store staff necessarily terribly knowledgeable or always really very helpful.
Yeah. That's really interesting. And I think you've touched upon this in your responses a bit, but in your opinion, what do you think are some of the valuable things a retailer could do to support someone like you who's planning for their future, to find products that best meet your needs?
Well, I think staff training would probably be top of the list. I think, I found that sometimes staff didn't know what was available themselves. Once I found something on the shelf that I asked about and told wasn't available, wasn't there, they'd never heard of it. And so, yeah, staff training, I think, is the most important thing.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Astrid. I'll move on to Ed next to hear more a bit about the retailer perspective. So Ed, as a retailer of accessible products, as well as the government champion for accessible design, I imagine you must look at a lot of trends related to the over 50s market or the market for inclusive products. Have you noticed any changes over the past few years or in the aftermath of COVID-19?
Thanks, Ploy. Morning, everyone, and thanks to Ploy and the team for putting on a fantastic event. In terms of trends that I've seen over the last few years, I don't think I need to stress the whole demographic shift in numbers, because Centre for Ageing Better does a much better job at me than proving just how many people are obviously aging in our society and needing greater support at home. So that's an obvious answer, and a trend I've seen over the last couple of years is just that growing demographic shift. I've seen an awful lot of movement away from disabled facility grant funding for adaptations in the home. There are hundreds of thousands, millions of people across the UK who don't qualify for disabled grant funding, and that puts huge pressure on local authorities, but also it puts huge pressure on the individuals themselves to go out and try and find the adaptations themselves. So actually that sort of movement away from local authority funding is something I've seen. I've seen a real focus around the need to get kitchens and bathrooms right. And I'm not just saying that because that's the theme of today, but for anyone needing greater support in the home, it's the kitchen and bathroom that you want the small changes made in. And it's so often the bathroom in particular where the biggest sort of design crimes tend to happen, which then prompts falls and other things in the home. And I suppose for our business and also for the industry, I think most recently with COVID, there has been a real impact from the pandemic. And as a business owner of a home adaptations business in March 2020, if you'd said to me, what does the future look like? I would have said it looks pretty grim for our business because people are isolating, vulnerable at home, and I don't know how we're going to support them. But actually what we've seen is I think COVID has really kind of accelerated the thinking for people that they are vulnerable and, they do need homes to be made safer. So we've seen a huge uptake in demand because of the COVID pandemic.
Thank you, Ed. I think the report talks a lot about the opportunity of the growing over 50s market, which you've touched upon. And we've also heard some of the personal reflections that Astrid has shared. What do you think that retailers, from your perspective, should be really embedding to better meet the needs of this market?
I think a couple of things on that. The first is retailers should understand how big this opportunity is. The retail sector has been so badly hit by COVID, and they are all just desperately trying to keep their businesses afloat and think about what they do with their shrinking store estate. And I think there's just a wonderful opportunity across retail in the UK to actually be repurposing some of the space in their stores, to be putting some of the inclusive products that the report talks about within store and demonstrating it in the right way. I'd also say that retailers should really think about who they're designing for and really understanding who's using these products and services. And Astrid, you spoke brilliantly about it being frustrating that you were going into store, talking to store staff, and they didn't have the knowledge. And that's no fault of store staff. They just need some basic education around what someone may need in the home, and giving people, particularly store staff, the confidence to talk to customers who may have an additional need that actually may be totally foreign to the person that is actually in store looking at supporting them. But just giving someone the confidence that they can talk to people and offer advice in the right way. And the other part of it, and I think it was exposed in the report, was being really clear around the features and benefits of these products. So many times Tom and Christine used the word easy to use. We've got to get across the message that actually this isn't just a specific group of products that is right for one group of people. These are just inclusive products that are right for everybody. And I think if everybody across society understands the benefits, then we're going to see much more movement in this space.
Thank you, Ed. And in your role as CEO of MotionSpot, you've got a lot of clients in the private sector looking to make their spaces, whether it's their hotels or offices, more inclusive. Do you have any advice for those that are thinking about going on their journey and making their stores or their properties or their product ranges more inclusive?
Yeah, a really, really, really important point. You can have the most inclusive design product in your stores, but actually, if the people who need those products actually can't access that store in the right way, it's going to fall down. So, one of the big things we do at MotionSpot is work with clients, retailers, retirement villages, hotels, to ensure the design of their spaces meet the needs of everybody. And that's not just thinking about disability as just being wheelchair users. And again, traditionally, retailers design stores for wheelchair access, but in reality, only 8% of anyone in the UK with a disability is in a wheelchair. So, just getting architects and retailers to think about what they can do around signage has come up today, seating, Tom has mentioned, lighting, acoustics, the type of materials they use, how easy it is to get to the loo from the section of the store that the best advice and inclusive products are being offered. Those are sort of some of the top tips I'd give to retailers.
Thanks, Ed. And also, wearing your hat as the government champion for accessible design, what do you think the role of government is, if any, in supporting over 50s consumers in the inclusive products agenda?
I think government has a really important role to play here. I mean, first and foremost, government needs to recognise and support that this is an area that an awful lot more focus and investment needs to go into. In terms of my role as government sector champion, supporting events like this and raising the profile of inclusive products and encouraging retailers to think about it in a different way is important. I'm doing a lot of work with people across government looking at regulations, how they can change to better reflect accessible housing, which I know Jack-El is very close to as well, and we'll talk about in a minute. But I feel government actually has a role to play around accrediting this industry as well, and making sure that, you know, the people who are designing and selling products are doing it in the right way, and that they're doing it, you know, ethically and morally, and people are being supported in their homes, so that people know that if they're coming to a provider, that they're a trusted provider. But the last thing I'd say on government is there is a huge benefit for government getting this right and supporting it, because we know there is a massive benefit to health and social care budgets for keeping people in their homes for longer, keeping them safe, and making sure that environments are inclusive for everyone.
Thank you so much, Ed. I'll now move on to speak to Jaquel, who is currently working with the Wandsworth Regeneration team to design more inclusive and accessible new build flats. So Jaquel, as a specialist housing occupational therapist, how important are inclusive products and design within the home?
Hi everybody, and thanks very much for asking me along. I'll try not to repeat what's been said previously, but I guess it's very important for all the reasons previously said, but particularly sort of as occupational therapists, we work with people with a wide range of impairments. So we really see firsthand the difficulties that people face daily due to poor design. And although getting the layout and design of buildings from the start is critical, as we've touched on, people also underestimate, I guess, the real difference even small products can make, and something as simple as a kitchen tap. So certainly my role in the regeneration team, I've been able to, I guess, put a bit of care and attention to detail. So using that kitchen tap as an example, so we're using ones with tall spouts that swivel, short lever handles. So whether you've got wet hands or poor grip, you can easily use it, but actually fill your pots and pans from the drainer. You don't have to lift it in and out. So often it is just having that bit of thought, but right from the outset. And I guess that's what inclusive design is about. It's not about add-ons. It's about trying to think about everything, but also that does look nice. And I know I sort of won't repeat it, but I know certainly in terms of particularly maybe occupational therapy and adaptations, there is that potential for negative views around institutional medical looking products. So people don't want them in their home, and research I know done by yourselves has sort of shown that people will end up not doing it or putting it off until they reach crisis. So that's why events like this and research, I think we do really need to tackle that, you know, why we accept things looking like that, I guess, really, and they don't have to. Also certainly in my role, often there's a misconception that inclusive products that are aesthetically pleasing are luxury or more expensive, when they really don't have to be. And even if they do cost slightly more, the benefits far outweigh any additional costs. So it could be things like if they're better quality, they're more robust, so they need less servicing and maintenance. You don't have to replace them, so you don't have to rip them out and put them back in. And talking about, I say, bathrooms, certainly in Wandsworth, we're in our accessible showers and adapted showers, we're using Huey products, like it is their basic range, but they're still attractive, brushed steel. So their shower riser rails are a combination, it's like an L-shaped rail. So actually you're reducing the need for about 3 rails. And in terms of sort of shower seats, they're wall mounted, adjustable height, they look nice, they don't have a leg. So people don't have to come in and change it. They don't have to rip it out. So I guess it is just that attention to detail, and hopefully as an occupational therapist, like, we should really be passionate about that.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think you've touched upon this a bit, but why do you think housing associations and others who build and manage homes should be taking this issue seriously?
I think, well, I guess certainly in terms of it sort of goes back to what Ed had said really as well. And I think research has shown over many years that accessible and adaptable design, and that's not just housing, actual housing design is, you know, it has far-reaching benefits such as time, money, disruption. People can stay in their home for longer, but also it means people are more independent, they rely less on support. I know Ed touched on people having less accidents. And something that people often forget, if your home is more easy to use and accessible, it can reduce loneliness and isolation. And another, I suppose, a good but sad example of where taking it seriously and I guess employing people like ourselves is, so Rachel Wooden, who's the other specialist housing OT in Wandsworth and Richmond, her post was actually set up about 6 or 7 years ago due to poor design. I think it was Housing Association. There were about 8 wheelchair accessible flats where the council ended up having to spend about £25,000 adapting each flat because of really basic things, so like door widths, not having wet floor showers, wrong positioning of a through floor lift because of a wall. So if they thought about that from the start, they could have saved lots of housing OT posts. And also something that I think certainly Ed and the research has touched on is positive marketing and addressing concerns even around housing design and not just products. As soon as people say accessible or adaptable, they might think that it has to look institutional, but as we know, that just so isn't the case. With a bit of thought and attention to detail, you can provide beautiful wet rooms, but also whether the person moving in is disabled or not. I mean, if something is well designed with easy to use fixtures and fittings, nobody's going to sort of turn around and say, oh, I don't want that. And I know another thing Ed touched on that I'm quite passionate about is about how we market it, or even potentially whether we trademark things as easy to use, and in terms of housing, what the features are. I know we've spoken about it before, where there was research in Northern Ireland carried out with people who lived in lifetime homes housing, and actually, interestingly, most of them didn't know they were in lifetime home standard housing, but when the features were pointed out to them, they said how helpful they were. So I guess, again, that goes back to people being aware and marketing, because I think it is a real lost opportunity.
Thank you so much for that, Jaquel. I'll now move on to the open Q&A to give some chance for the audience to answer some questions. We've had a few come in from Avant, and I'll start off with one of those, but then I'll also go through some of the ones in the Q&A box. So one of the first questions we had, and Christine and Paul, please do join us in sharing your cameras, was how can we encourage builders, architects, and home stylists to promote and engage on inclusive design? I think, Jaquel, this touches on a bit of what you've been saying. Is there anything you'd like to add to that?
Sorry, I didn't hear that. Could you repeat it?
It was how can we encourage builders, architects, and home stylists to promote and engage on inclusive design? I guess it goes back to how we present it and market it, and also education, like in training. I guess all those people involved, but particularly specialists. I know the Construction Industry Council had something called the BEPE project. It was a Built Environment Professional Educators course, and it is about getting right in there at the start. I know things like for architects now, the RIBA plan of work does embed inclusive design through all the stages. But again, we need to get in at the start when people are learning, when they're training. Inclusive design is good design, good product design is easy to use. So I think it is about getting the message out there and not stigmatizing or people thinking it's not for them. When you explain it, people really think, well, it is a bit of a no-brainer. But I suppose events like this, research, getting out there, but definitely education of those people who are working right across the built environment, whether that's designers, builders, or whoever, I guess. Thank you, Jaquel. Did anyone else want to add anything to that one before I move on to the next question?
I'd just add a couple of points to that. I think we need more access to inclusive products, so we need a bigger range, and that will in turn incentivize architects and contractors to specify and install more products in their developments. And we need more products at a range of price points. So at the moment, there is this sort of slight disparity going on around. There's an awful lot of product which is very cost effective at the bottom end of the market that looks like it fits into hospital, and then there's a lot of products at the high end of the market which costs a bit more. And what we're trying to do both as a business and an industry is fill that middle gap to say, actually, you can have beautiful looking product that we all want in our homes at an IKEA type price point, and that's where we need to get the industry to.
Thank you, Ed. Another question we've got in the Q&A chat. So did you find in store the need for more intergenerational education over aging and design at all ages? It's just as difficult for a young family to negotiate steep stairs with a buggy as it is for an older person to climb. I wonder if I'll pass on to the research team. Tom and Paul, I know you were in the stores with participants. Tom, did you want to have a go at responding to that first?
Yeah, the short answer is yes, we did find evidence of intergenerational usefulness. And in fact, one of the key participants that told us about this is Astrid, who's right here. So Astrid, when you put in that seat into your shower, you told us that your grandson was using it just because, not because he needed to, but because, quote, he was lazy, and it's that kind of usefulness that we did notice. Absolutely. Yeah.
Did anyone else have anything else they wanted to add to that before I move on to the next question?
It was just an emphatic yes that, obstacles for older people are obstacles for young people too.
And just to add to that, just very quickly, on my earlier point about avoiding age-specific marketing, this is a good reinforcement of that, because, you make something easy to use for a certain demographic, but it ends up being easy to use and useful and attractive for others. So it's a good reinforcement of that point.
And I think just to add to that, certainly it's something that they've all tried to push in terms of housing design or different housing standards, is that, and as soon as sometimes people do just pigeonhole and think it's for disabled or older people, but when you actually explain the benefits to everybody, sometimes that's when the penny drops. So I do think, and often that example of parents with buggies is used for level access into a building, space to move around. So I think it's a really useful point to make, because then it just includes, it's more inclusive, isn't it? It just includes everybody, and it's not just for somebody else.
Yeah, just to add to that, Jaquel, totally agree. And I think that usefulness across people and across the same person with changing needs. So we all have situational and temporary needs when, for that moment in time, actually that step-free access is incredibly important, or that easy to see button is really important. Maybe we have an eye infection and your sight just goes but for a period as opposed to permanently. So when products are designed with a range of needs and a range of uses in mind, it just means that the experience is more consistent across all of your customers and kept more delightful for longer across the life cycle of that product.
Thank you all. We've just got a few minutes left, so I'll ask one quick question that we came in earlier. So digital transformation is happening due to COVID. How can organizations that are transforming themselves digitally, perhaps moving to more online shopping or services, ensure that their developments are inclusive? I might pass that over to you, Christine, to give us a quick response before seeing if anyone else would like to add to that.
Thanks, Ploy. I mean, this is something that was really interesting. We did most of the research prior to the COVID period, and even in that pre-COVID era, we saw a huge amount of online interaction from consumers to find the products that they wanted and needed. So, starting point is this community of over 50s, right through to over 80s, as you hear from, Astrid, that really right through the community, there's increasing use and significant use of digital that has lifted up through the COVID period particularly, and will probably remain at a higher level from this point forward. So really thinking about how does that experience work? How do people come in? Really good question from Eric that I've answered online, so on the chat, so please have a look at that as well. But how do people search? And the answer is in many and variable ways. How do people find that information? And it's that proactively reaching to them saying, we have these products that are designed with ranging needs in mind that are easier to maintain or or that we will have set up in your home, so you don't need to think about how you get it from store to home, or even using things like emerging technologies. And we did some testing of your augmented reality. There's some ways you can use augmented reality, just using a standard mobile phone to see how a product might look or fit in someone's home. And it also allows you to have a 360-degree look of it when you can't go in store, touch and feel it. So using new technologies to make it easier for people to get that sense of confidence prior to making a purchase.
Thanks, Christine. So we've now run out of time, but I just want to thank you everyone, to the panel and the research team. I'm sure you'll all agree that was a really rich and interesting discussion. I'm sorry we didn't have time to get through all the questions, but we'll try and respond to them after this event. And also a big thank you to our audience as well for actively participating in this webinar and asking so many interesting questions. Before you go, we'd really appreciate it if you could take a moment to tell us your thoughts about this webinar and the poll that has come up on the screen. It's just a few questions and should take no longer than a minute. And please do keep in touch with us after the event. I'm sure there'll be a link to our newsletter in the chat. We really want this research and report to be the start of an ongoing dialogue to stimulate change in this space. Also, our next Aging Better webinar, Putting Age in the Frame, will be broadcast on the 22nd of July. The webinar will look at how imagery shapes and reinforces negative attitudes to aging and explore current efforts to depict older age in a more positive and realistic light. A link will be in the chat and details are on our website. Thank you again to all of our panelists, researchers and audience, and goodbye.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Cool.